Is Mo Salah the greatest overseas player the Premier League has ever seen? On this episode of The Pitch, we dissect Mo Salah's decision to leave Liverpool. Has the saga damaged his legacy? And who replaces a player of his level? And then the big debate. Is he Liverpool's greatest of all time? David Lewis, let's start off by talking about the decision for him to leave. In December, David, he insinuated that someone might not want him at the club. Was that the case?
I think that was maybe kind of over-egged a little bit, this idea that kind of behind the scenes people were plotting to get rid of him. I think it did show that there had been a huge breakdown in the relationship with not just maybe Arne Slot, but kind of people further up. You think of the sporting director, etc. So it maybe hinted at a little bit of that. But I don't think there was any kind of plan to force him out of the club. I just think there clearly been a shift in how they felt they could use him, what his value was to the team at that time, which is a decision that a coach has to make, particularly with an ageing player. So I don't think there's anything more sinister to it than that. But what I would say is that outburst, I think, was kind of the beginning of the end, and I do feel like that's led us to a situation where he's had to, he felt that he's had to leave. Lewis, do you echo that?
Yeah, I echo what David just said. I think what he came out with at Leeds, in the mix zone at Leeds, was maybe more severe than it's reflected upon now. I think a lot of people have forgotten just what he said, the gravity of what he said about the manager, about the club in general. I don't think that's the sort of thing that you can come back from with just a handshake and we're mates again now. I've always thought there was more to it in the Salah v Slot, whatever you want to frame it, sort of. I think many people are saying it was a civil war at the time. I don't think it was quite that far, but I don't think that relationship could have ever been repaired, really. And I think it was either going to be Salah leaves or Slot leaves. And at this moment, it looks like it's going to be, it is going to be Salah that leaves. It's just whether Slot follows him out the door.
Do you think he was ever thrown out under the bus like he claimed?
I think Salah does have a tendency to maybe over-exaggerate things slightly. It wouldn't be the first time he's done that. But I suppose he also, a player of his talents, earns the right to, speak out how he does. He knows that his words travel around the world in seconds. But yeah, I think Salah maybe exaggerated it slightly. I don't really think the club threw him under the bus. I mean, they just give him a 400 grand a week contract 6 months before those comments. So if that's thrown someone under the bus, then, well...
And so be it. No, it's incredibly interesting. I think that what we've seen over Salah's time at Liverpool is a player who gives us all and never got injured and played week in, week out, winning everything there is to win. So his legacy before this was undeniably intact. Do you think it's changed at all from these comments?
I wouldn't say so. I think you're going to struggle to make that case with fans as well. At the end of the day, when people reflect back on Mo Salah at Liverpool, I think they're going to be thinking of all the goals, the many, many goals, the assists, the brilliant performances, and of course the trophies that he brought to the club. I don't think anybody's going to really remember what happened at Leeds as kind of the turning point, or it may have been. It was a significant moment in his Liverpool career, in that, as I say, kind of signalled the beginning of the end. But outside that, that's not going to be the thing that fans think about. They're going to think about the moments of joy that he gave them, and there were so many of those over the years, really, that overshadows any kind of nonsense or arguments that have happened behind the scenes.
So if you look back on this era of players that Salah's kind of led, what is the moment you look back on the most?
I think him scoring a penalty in Champions League final was a key moment. It's only a penalty, if you want to kind of call it that. They're the kind of easiest chances that strikers tend to get. But I think because it had come 12 months on from what happened, that heartbreak in Kiev, and he was kind of such a figurehead for that team. Obviously, they won the biggest prize it's possible to win in that moment in Madrid. It was just such a massive moment, and it was so fitting that he scored and had those kind of nerves of steel to put that penalty away early in the game, which very much decided how the game was from that point, and of course decided in terms of winning it as well. So I think that's a huge moment for him.
Well, as an Arsenal fan, I'll always love him for that moment, because it set on my nerves quite early on. Yeah. That could have been the worst day of my life, to be honest with you. In terms of the Slot and the Salah, disagreement behind the scenes, we know they kind of made up, and it was like a handshake, not a hug, was the line, wasn't it? Do you think this has done more damage to Slot himself than Salah?
Yeah, I do actually. I think there was fans turning against Slot before that, because the run leading up to that incident had been terrible. They lost 4-1 against PSV. They got thrashed by Nottingham Forest at Anfield. But I think fans were still a bit like, listen, he's won the league, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt for now. But I think when the Salah thing happened, when Salah came out and said what he said about Slot, I think that was the moment where a more minority turned to a majority of Liverpool fans that became dissenters against Slot. I think that naturally they had to pick sides, and they are going to side with the guy who's been there for nearly a decade over the bloke who's been there for a year and perhaps has never really connected with the fans. I mean, you never saw Slot going over to the Kop and, you know, giving it all that. He's not that sort, so fair enough. But Salah's always been a fan favourite. I would be very, very surprised if he's not miles ahead in the shirt sales over the last 9 years since he's been at the club. And the fans did just say, do you know what, I'm on Salah's side here. A lot of them anyway. Some of them were like, that's out of order, and, you know, fair enough. I think you can see both sides of that story. But I think that was the point for Slot, that if he does end up losing his job, you may look at that incident as one of the key turning points.
And what about the other players in the dressing room? Do you know what side they took?
I mean, publicly, we don't know. I think a lot of the players have said they respect Salah for what he's done, but a few of them have sort of hinted that the fact that they maybe wouldn't have said the same thing themselves. A lot of them have publicly backed Slot when asked, you know, are you behind the manager? Virgil van Dijk's come out and said he's let the head coach down at times this season. Alisson's backed him in a press conference as well. But I do think naturally the players inside there will be like thinking similar, you know, thinking, well, maybe Mo has a point there, because at the end of the day he's a leader, maybe not in terms of wearing the armband, but he's the standard bearer, similar to Virgil van Dijk, that they all look up to. You know, when they were joining Liverpool, they were thinking, oh wow, can't wait to play in the same team as Mo Salah. So whatever he says carries a lot of weight, not just in the fan base but also in the dressing room, and it'd be hard for those players not to maybe get behind Mo in this tough moment for him.
Do you think Salah no longer being in the Premier League makes the league itself, you know, a poorer league?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, because I think you do always need your superstars that are going to be the main attraction. If you think of what kind of, you know, having Ronaldo and Messi in La Liga for so long, that made that such a watchable league, and maybe kind of some of the, you know, shine goes away when you lose big superstars like that, albeit, you know, Real Madrid are always going to replace that. You know, you've got Barca with Yamal, you've got Mbappe at Real Madrid or Jude Bellingham, so they always kind of keep that going, whereas the Premier League, you're watching De Bruyne go, Salah's going now, you're starting to think, okay, who's going to be the next superstars that are stepping forward? And there maybe aren't as many obvious candidates now. So I do think it makes the league kind of less attractive. You do need those superstar names. But of course, the idea, not just for Liverpool, but clubs in general, they've got to find those replacements. They've got to create those kind of legends who are really going to sell the league. So yeah, it does feel like a big loss in terms of marketing the league almost.
Well, absolutely. In terms of the marketing, you know, he is one of the greatest overseas players the Premier League has ever seen. And it's something that's been brought up in conversation recently, of course, because he's leaving and people think about where he ranks amongst them. Who do you have as the best overseas player?
I've always kind of, maybe this is just the era that I watched, but always kind of felt that Thierry Henry, and I struggled to come away from that. I just think he was, you know, you think of that assist record he had that just marked him out as not just an elite goal scorer, but also a creator, albeit Salah's got very close to that record on a couple of occasions. So he's right up there. But the fact that Henry holds that record, for me, that has some significance. And I think there's also, it's not to do Salah down, but I think Henry had a touch more grace about the way he played the game, and I think aesthetics are important in the way, you know, that you consume football. I mean, there's a cigarette paper between the two. Don't get me wrong. I think they're very, very close. But for me, it's Thierry Henry. But the fact he's even close, that tells you how good he was.
Yeah, Lewis.
Yeah, I'm with David on Thierry Henry. I know you're obviously an Arsenal fan, so not just saying it because you've slipped us both a tenner under the table. But I think Mo's right up there. If you look at his longevity, the fact that he was signed on a relatively low fee, I mean 35-ish million is you know, it's loose change to these Premier League clubs. I think probably for similar reasons, when I was getting into football, that Arsenal team were one of the first teams that I, you know, watched regularly, and Thierry Henry was always the main man. So maybe it's just more the fact that he was the first superhero I saw in the Premier League. But Mo Salah is right up there. I always think, you know, Kevin De Bruyne as well. He could do things with football that not many could. Also, Ronaldo had his time here as well, but I don't think he quite had the Premier League longevity. So for me, it's probably just Thierry Henry, but as I say, as David says as well, only just.
Does Salah make your top three?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think for me it's Henry, Salah, and De Bruyne. But you know, if they could go in any order, and I wouldn't grumble, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the fact is that there's no question in my mind that if you do a Premier League all-time 11, he's on the right wing.
Yeah.
You know, there's nobody gets close to him in terms of that position, that's for sure. And like you say, top three at the very least. And if someone said it was Salah, you'd struggle to disagree. So, you know, he's right up there.
What was the difference then? Because now, you know, he is held in such understandable a high regard. At Chelsea, he was a flop. You know, then he went off to Italy. He had a couple of spells over there, and he's come back and, you know, he just dominated the league for 9 years. You know, what do you think changed?
I just think it was maturity. I think he had to go away and kind of learn a little bit more about playing a role in a system, learn a bit more about himself as a footballer, and just find that consistency of playing and learning all those experiences that he got in Italy were just absolutely crucial to him becoming the player that he did. So he was just a young player when he came, and you know, he joined Chelsea at a time when they had so many superstars ahead of him as well. And it's interesting that we're talking about top three Premier League players. Well, De Bruyne was a flop at Chelsea as well, and we put him up in there. Yeah. So it can just be timing, can't it, really? And he was a very young player. He just needed that time to develop, and when he came back, he was ready then to absolutely explode.
Absolutely. And he's someone who is effectively irreplaceable. However, I've asked you both already about this today. He's going to need to be replaced some way or another. Who do you think is the person they should go for?
It's the, £100 million question, isn't it? It's going to cost a lot of money to do so, and I don't think all the names that you can reel off, Michael Olise, Jan Diomande at Leipzig, Jan Kuba Minter, these seem to be the names that are coming up the most. None of them are really appealing to me. I mean, Michael Olise maybe, but I also think he's probably the most unattainable of those three, given how much Bayern would probably want for him. He just signed a long-term contract, but he's going to have to be replaced. I think personally Liverpool need to sign 2 forwards this summer, whether that's 2 wide forwards, however they do it. I just think Federico Chiesa's probably going to go. I don't think Luis Diaz was ever really replaced. They sort of said at the time maybe Rio Angamoa, they thought he'd step up, but he hasn't had the minutes he would have. Some people would have liked for him to have at the time. And I just think they've really struggled in terms of rotating that front three. Cody Gakpo's form's gone like that this season, so I think they need 2 forwards. But for me, Jan Diomande at Leipzig, I can't say I've watched enough of him to know how good he is. But one thing you would say is if you've look at Liverpool's track record of signing these sorts of players, there's not many misses in there. But the problem he or whoever it is will have is he will be known as the Salah replacement. Yeah. There's no way he's going to come in and score 30 goals next season. None of them will do. So they almost need to just get that out of the head, because they're going to have a lot of pressure on the shoulders. And you look at when Gareth Bale left Spurs, they signed about 7 players and they were all terrible, to be honest. You look at these big players over the years in the Premier League and how they've been replaced. A lot of clubs get it wrong when replacing these really good players. So it's going to be the sort of decision that will define the next 5 years for Liverpool. I think as well, though, because he's not had, by his standards, the best season ever, do you think it might be a bit of a smoother transition almost? It's not like, say, for example, he went at the end of last season, but oh my God, like, this is incredible. How do we do this? And now they're already kind of, playing without him more often than not, aren't they, as well?
That's it. You've seen a slight decline there, which, by the way, it's not a criticism at all. The fact that he's held off kind of the age curve for so long is ridiculous, really, and it shows you how good and how dedicated he's been. But it makes it feel a little bit easier. And I think one of the good things as well, and I think this is how they've got to think about it, Liverpool aren't going into this thinking they are looking for a Salah replacement almost, because the idea they're going to go and find a winger somewhere who's getting 30 to 40 goals in a season, you can't replicate what he's done and the style with which he's done it. It's going to be impossible to do that. And I think they've already prepared for that. Signing Ekitike and Isak, they want to funnel more goals through the centre forward. So you're almost looking for less of a kind of wide goal scorer, although you want them to chip in, but more of a kind of creator from that side. So that maybe makes things a little bit easier for them in terms of the market, the scouting. Because if you were looking for someone who was like Salah when he came at the age of, 23, 24, it's a fool's errand. There's no chance. So I think someone who's going to be maybe less of a guarantee of goals, but more of a creator for the centre forwards that they bought last summer.
Who would you like?
I think Diamande looks encouraging in terms of the numbers there. He's really good in terms of creativity. He's good age as well. And I think he can be a bit more of that facilitator. He can play off either side as well by the looks of things. So, there's a lot to like about him, I think. And he just kind of suits Liverpool's model in age, coming from one of the Red Bull clubs as well. So he'll be a good presser, adds the pace back in. And he's a dribbler, which I think is, he ranks so highly for dribbles. I think that's... The Premier League as it is now, with these kind of the low blocks, are better than they've ever been. You need 1v1 quality to unlock that, and I think he's got that in spades, so he could be a really smart signing, I think.
Absolutely, and yeah, Salah was one of the smartest signings Liverpool in the Premier League have ever seen. I want to know from both of you, is he Liverpool's greatest ever player? Lewis, I'll start with yourself. If it's not Salah, who do you think it is?
For me, it's a toss-up between him and Steven Gerrard. And I'm ruling out the likes of Ian Rush, Sir Kenny Dalglish, these sorts of people, purely because they played before my time. So I can't, like I would never put Pele or Maradona in that debate. I've not watched them play, so I'm not going to use them. So I was growing up at the same time that Steven Gerrard was. It seemed to me like he was banging in screamers left, right and centre, winning games on his own. And Salah's almost done the same in this era. The thing he's got, Salah, is that he's won more trophies to go with it. I know Gerrard obviously won Champions League, FA Cup, things like that. But Salah's got 2 Premier League titles, and last season especially, he was by far the best player in the league. Liverpool won the title by 10 points, I think. I'm not saying they wouldn't have won it if he had broke his leg on the first day, but they wouldn't have, won it at a canter. I think he won that title for them last season, and I think when you look back on that season in 5 years, you'll probably think, do you know what, if they didn't draw PSG and they had a kind of draw, they probably were the best team in Europe alongside PSG and could have gone all the way in that competition as well. Maybe unlucky with the draws elsewhere as well. So I'm going to go with Salah because of the fact he's won those 2 Premier League titles, just over Stevie G for me.
I think I have to kind of pay more attention to maybe a bit further back, to be fair, just with the way they won't let me back on Merseyside if I don't, but the way that Kenny Dalglish gets spoken about, and obviously everything else he did for the club as well, but you don't include that in his greatness as a player, but it is worth mentioning. But I think a lot would place Kenny at the top, and obviously still before my time even, but watching clips, seeing how integral he was to the teams that were basically the greatest team of a generation. For they had such a long period of being dominant, and Kenny Dalglish at the absolute heart of that. And I mean, I saw Jamie Carragher's kind of list recently as well, where he had Salah maybe down in 6th, I think it was, and you think again, there's Graham Souness in there, John Barnes. I mean, for Souness in particular, he was in that team with Kenny that won 3 European Cups, multiple league titles, 5 or 6 league titles in that run. Ian Rush was in that team as well, 346 goals. I mean, that's pretty good. That's never getting beaten. So, it's not a kind of, it's no offence to Mo Salah, I would say, to say if, you may be ranking 4th, 5th, 6th in that kind of area, because we're talking about Liverpool and the biggest or second biggest, or you can have that argument with United, but club in English football, the most successful club in English football. The fact he's even near the top 5 and in that discussion shows you how ridiculously good he's been. But I would maybe go with Kenny, with the kind of the misty-eyed looks that I see when people talk about him and what I've seen and how integral he was to a side that won everything.
This can sound like a really daft question, but you mentioned about Thierry Henry earlier and kind of that presence he had on the pitch and the aesthetics. Because Salah doesn't really have that, and he's a bit more jinky, and he'll get he'll just get all the goals in. Do you think he's gonna stand the test of time in terms of his legacy moving on?
I think he has to, because as much as he kind of plays a little bit more in straight lines, I kind of understand what you're saying in terms of that. I mean, the sheer numbers there, I mean, even if you just looked at his Wikipedia page, you kind of have a feel for how great he was. But also, the aesthetics thing with Henry, I mean, again, there's not a lot in it. I just liked, it was the era I was kind of growing up. I really liked the way Thierry Henry played the game, and he was just a real artist. Now, Salah's not those levels, but also wasn't like a clunky footballer at all. I mean, the amount of times I've seen him beat kind of 4 or 5 players and score a goal. I mean, a ridiculous dribbler in his
weeks, wasn't it?
yeah.
Wasn't it?
So he's a ridiculous dribbler in his prime as well. So he's not a poor player to watch by any means. It was just that personal preference, just slightly there. But there's no doubt for me his legacy will stand the test of time, because, like I say, you look at the sheer numbers and then watch some of the goals that he scored down the years. From distance, the ones where he'd beaten 5 or 6, as I say, different kinds of goals, all kinds of goals. Like I say, one of the greatest Liverpool players of all time, which is an incredible compliment. One of the greatest Premier League players of all time. He's just right up there with both of those, and where he ranks on those lists is pretty much just personal preference, really, I think.
Absolutely. Look, we've heard from both of you two. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say as well. Where do you rank Salah in terms of Liverpool's greatest ever and also the Premier League's best ever overseas player? Hope you've enjoyed it. And if you like your boxing, don't forget to check out The Hook with Charlotte Daly on Mail Sport Boxing.